to ask you some questions about what you talked about in your speech. You had mentioned your opponent being a failure, and you went and you talked about education. Can you tie that together? Because I don't think I understood what you meant there.
Sure. So when I was talking about her micromanaging the districts and telling them that they should go and post more things online, post more campaign finance reports.
For the school board candidates, okay.
And that's something that they already do. And that's something, like, she wants to post more of them in the newspaper. That would cost more money. That's an unfunded mandate for something that they don't necessarily need to be doing.
Where do school board candidates file their campaign finance reports online? My understanding was you had to go to the school district. I mean, they make them available, but you have to go to the school board or the school district to get those reports. Is that incorrect?
I know that you can find them online. You can find them online through a PDF.
Where would you find those online? Because my understanding is, right now, because I do a lot of open records requests, whenever I have to go get that information, I have to physically go get that information. So if it's online somewhere, where would that normally be? Because it's not with the county, it's not with the state, which is where most people file their candidate reports. So where do they file it in a different place?
I personally can't give you the website right now. I can get back to you and let you know what the website is.
Okay. You had spoke about education and the budget and cuts, funding cuts. Can you elaborate on that? Cuts to education?
The $5 billion in cuts to education? What would you like me to elaborate about?
No. You had spoke about the cuts to education. Were you talking, that's around the time that you were talking about your opponent being a failure. So are you saying that happened because of your opponent, or you were kind of a general critique of the legislature?
That was a general critique of what the legislature did. I was explaining that. But something else that I would personally do is address not just the budget when it comes to education, but specific policy, such as the new STAR exam, as how it compares to the tax and issues like that.
So the delegation only had one member of the delegation that voted in favor of that budget that made those cuts to education. That was Representative Margot.
Right.
Your thoughts on that particular vote?
I mean, Margot votes the way Margot wants to vote. I have no influence on how he votes.
Okay.
Do I agree with it? No, but I don't live in his district. I'm not his constituent.
Right. Sure. Well, I asked because you worked for him, doing social media.
For class projects.
Right. Okay. And the one other question I had was, you talked about contracts and keeping contracts here, and I didn't understand where you were talking about contracts. Are you talking about state or local? I'm confused with that.
Money that comes from the state that is allocated to build buildings at UTEP, the new dental school, should we get one. Contracts like that they need to be put up for a bid, and then they are given. But sometimes the contracts are given to out-of-state contractors.
Oh, as opposed to focusing on local.
Yeah.
Okay, and is that statutory? Is that by policy, or where's the fault there that ends up happening?
Well, so take the University of Texas in Austin, for example.
Okay.
Because it is a state school funded by state dollars, they have to have a certain percentage of their students be Texas residents. So what I would like to see happen is, if we're using our Texas state tax dollars for state projects, it would make sense to me to have these contracts meet a certain quota. So say 35% of the contracts be given or subcontracted to local contractors. If we're having this Texas money coming from Austin being allocated to El Paso, it would make sense to help to keep that money in El Paso.
Okay.
Instead of sending that money out of state.
Okay, so by statute, kind of favor the local companies over out-of-town, out-of-state companies for publicly funded.
If it's our tax money, it makes sense to keep our tax money here in El Paso instead of sending it somewhere else.
What would be some of the legislation you would propose if you were elected state rep for District 77?
District 77.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's some of the legislation you plan on proposing?
First and foremost, I would like to see something happen. Given that we're on the topic, I would like to see something done about having the contracts meet certain quotas. So if I can have legislation that would allow for for a certain amount of contracts to be subcontracted out to local companies. I would really like to see that happen because that would help our jobs, that would help our economic development, and it just makes sense.
Going back to your focus was on education in that speech. If you're elected, how do you undo it?
How do you
Right. How do you, in other words, do you propose legislation to put money back in, or what's your plan to fix what happened in the last session towards education?
Something I would like to see happen if elected. I would hope that I could be placed on the public education committee or on the higher education committee, and that way I can learn as much as possible about their process and how things work. That way I can be as effective as possible. If I'm elected, should I be re-elected? So I would like to keep fighting for education. Like I said in my speech earlier, my aunt is an elementary school teacher here in El Paso, Texas, and I do talk with her often. Aside from the budget, El Paso Independent School District did something really great. Even though they suffered from budget cuts, they didn't cut any teachers.
Right.
And that was a big thing for them, and they deserve congratulations for that. But they still need more help. There is money in the Texas Rainy Day Fund, so that some of that money should be allocated towards education. And I would also like to see not just fighting for the budget, but also fighting for the different methods for testing the kids, because that test is going to affect them in more ways than one. And I would like to be a part of that process to learn, not just, as a legislator say this is what's going to happen, but get feedback from the teachers, get feedback from the superintendents, get feedback from the people who are on the grounds, because they're the ones who are going to be affected by the legislation created by it.
Final question. Probably the biggest story that's been hanging over El Paso for the last 5-6 years has been the ongoing public corruption scandal. A big part of the ongoing public corruption scandal has been involved with school districts and contracts at school districts and funding of candidates. So why is an idea like the one Representative Marquez has put forward, why would that be a bad thing?
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying there's better things that could be happening right now. They do already post those things online. If you want to do public records requests, you can go get that information. That's not a priority when there's a lot of suffering going on in the classrooms.
Right, but when you do it that way, the cost goes down to the private citizen as opposed to being sucked up by the school district that already has an IT department.
So she was trying to recommend things that are already being done. If you were in the El Paso Times in that meeting, they were trying to explain to her everything that she was initiating, they said that they already do. And some other ideas that she had, like posting some of those things in newspapers, for example, El Paso Independent School District already does that. Garantino Independent School District would have to spend money to do that. Money that they don't have. Money that could be put to something more useful for the kids. That should be the focus on the kids.
And last thing, if you were talking to an undecided voter in your district, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that you don't have to be great to get started. Like Martin Luther King said, you don't have to be great to get started. You just have to get started to be great. A lot of people looked at me and said that I'm young. Why wouldn't I run to later? I'm not gonna. Why would I sit back and watch everything happen? And when I can become involved. I enrolled at UT when I was 17. I was in London working with the Center for Parliamentary Studies by the time I was 20. 22, I started my own small business. I come from a very hardworking family. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I haven't stopped. I've been in several legislators' offices. I've worked at several political consulting firms. I have experience and I have energy and I have enthusiasm. I was born and raised here. My entire family is here. I want to come back and do the most I can for my community.